Hello and welcome to today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to speak about the security situation surrounding Afghanistan and Afghanistan itself, obviously, and also the region around Afghanistan, including the nation of Pakistan and Iran, and of course Central Asia and China. And I would like to speak about how the Hindukush mountains in northern Afghanistan is currently the stage for a superpower competition that's going on right now, and how it is a golden key for the emergence of the New World Order, or if success is on the side of the US, and how it will help the US to continue its golden era. And of course, the security situation in Afghanistan has brought some sort of sense of anxiety among all the superpowers, including China, Pakistan, United States, Iran, and of course Russia, because the crisis in this region have historically played out to cause chaos in one of the regions surrounding it. Now, the history of the Hindu Kush belt is filled with many stories that date back to the pre-Islamic and post-Islamic eras. Events that occur around this mountainous belt usually end up changing the geopolitical situation in Iran and the Indian subcontinent. Today, this mountain belt is going through a similar historical event, once again, the purpose of which is to change the geopolitical situation in one of the regions surrounding it. The last event, of course, was the defeat of the Soviet Union and, of course, the American invasion of Afghanistan, which dramatically changed the world order since then. Now, after the withdrawal of the United States forces from Afghanistan after 2 decades of their presence, another event in the country is about to dramatically change the world order. Today, there's a passive and silent world war going on around the world, although it's not very silent anymore since the war in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine is almost close to something we call a direct war, but it's not exactly a direct confrontation based on historical events such as World War One or World War Two. But nonetheless, the war that's going on right now is being played by the world superpowers, including United States, Russia, and Iran in the region, and of course China behind it. So the current passive and silent world war that's going on around the world, where lands like Ukraine and Palestine are already engaged in a decisive conflict with the support of the rival superpowers, Afghanistan was the trigger of all these conflicts that are currently going on right now. Although much underestimated and neglected globally by media and analytical experts, Afghanistan was, in fact, the beginning of America's golden age in 2001, and it's yet about to become the decisive battlefield for the continuation or end of this global age, or this golden age, sorry. The Hindu Kush mountain belt has historically served as a security belt for the Indo-Iranian dynasties, where the mountains separated the two great nations from direct confrontations in most times. But every now and then throughout history, an event has led to a shift in power in both the regions, but they would usually originate in the region now known as Afghanistan. Today, this security belt threatens and protects more than just the two regions, which were historically India and Iran. Today, it actually covers the fate of the entire world and the superpowers located on different continents. The Hindu Kush region today is a decisive factor in changing the balance of global power in general, and is a battleground for establishing a new world order or maintaining or continuing the current one. The New World Order, of course, is a multipolar world where Russia, Iran, China, and India aim to end the golden age of America and establish a world where America is no longer the only sole superpower in control of everything. And of course, the current world order is a world dominated by the hegemony of the United States, where they've continuously changed the geopolitical situation of various regions around the world, especially the Middle East, Afghanistan, and of course, Eastern Europe. Now, these changes were made by the United States for the aim of securing their interests in these regions for the long term and extending its golden age through the continuation of war and crisis in areas close to its rivals, of course, such as Ukraine, Palestine, Middle East, and Afghanistan, which are all located close to Iran, Russia, China, and India, if you would consider them one rival. However, since the Ukraine war, the goal of preserving the golden age of the United States has failed miserably, even leading to a more powerful Russia and more unity among the rivals of the United States. This led to the second phase of the war, of course, when their failure in Ukraine led to the war in Israel and a war between Israel and Hamas, which is a historical conflict that ultimately proved Hamas's strength against Israel for the first time, in fact, at the higher military level, although not completely considered a decisive defeat, but this was a setback nonetheless for Israel and America, and it also strengthened the unity of America's rivals and also strengthened Iran's position as one of America's global rivals, and of course in the Middle East region. America's presence in the Middle East regions in the regions around Iran in total, including Afghanistan and the Middle East, and the failure to actually tackle, challenge, or destroy the revolutionary government that turned Iran's weak and old army into a world-class military power capable of producing, supplying, and inventing its own modern weapons. The American occupation and presence in the Middle East brought all kinds of advanced military technologies to the region, which led to Iran's access to them through the black market and the local mafia. So the United States literally provided Iran with the opportunity to upgrade its own military. All these miscalculations and the failures to preserve its golden age by supporting hostile or belligerent nations to wage war against Russia and Iran has left the United States with limited options, because they're pressurizing Russia through the war in Ukraine and pressurizing Iran through its support of Iranian rivals in the region, such as the Saudi Arabians, the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Israel, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. United States have failed to push Iran or pressure Iran into submission or some sort of setback. Instead, it's Iran and Russia that have gained the initiative in these wars, and they're currently winning. So this has left United States with limited options. One of these options, and it's a very key option, is the Afghanistan front, which they plan to use to spread war and terrorism towards Central Asia and Iran. Now, Central Asia serves as a Russian region of interest and security since the days of the Great Game with Great Britain. However, today, the situation in Afghanistan does not seem very favorable for America. Now, the long-term stronghold of the United States, which is Pakistan, it appears to be crumbling. The Pakistani government is facing the side effects of this new great game in Afghanistan, and with no surprise, since any crisis in Afghanistan have usually led to the spread of the crisis to the Indian subcontinent, beginning in Peshawar and Punjab. The presence of a crisis in Afghanistan has always led to a great game in which various powers across the region try to throw or push this crisis at each other to save themselves and create a significant geopolitical changes in their rivals. However, the current crisis will not only change the geopolitical situation of the region around Afghanistan, but the failure and success of each side will determine the future of the New World Order. And this change will originate in northern Afghanistan, the region around the Hindukush mountains. Now, the Hindukush is where the superpowers compete for control currently, and so far the Hindukush is not entirely in the hands of either side, but it appears to be controlled to some extent by both sides. Now, when I say control, I do not mean direct control. Obviously, there are no foreign forces per se so you can expect like American forces on the ground, Russian forces on the ground, Iranian forces on the ground. You won't see them, but they are present in Afghanistan. They have indirect control over some of these territories through their groups or proxy groups that they operate under their influence, such as the Taliban, that is traditionally Pakistani proxy group supported by the United States, which currently holds the power in Afghanistan and is largely bolstered by the United States and Pakistan to, of course, further US and Pakistani interests in the region. However, it appears that they have failed to gain total control of the Hindukush mountains after their defeat in the Panjshir and Andarab regions because of their local strong resistance and support of the anti-American alliance. Now, the Panjshir and Andarab regions have traditionally and historically served as a resistance stronghold against the Taliban and Pakistani expansion towards Afghanistan. But since the arrival of the Taliban in Afghanistan in 2021, they have managed to take Panjshir and Andarab and all the other regions in the north. But however, they have failed to gain any foothold or any control over the heights of those Hindukush mountains close to Panjshir and Andarab, and they have fought for 2 years straight in order to take control from the resistance there, and they have failed miserably with a lot of casualties. At the moment, there is no conflict going on in the region directly, but there seems to be some sort of a temporary ceasefire which has prevented further conflict in the Panjshir and Andarab regions, but the situation remains the same. The Taliban have the provinces, but they do not have the heights, which is key for Taliban and Pakistan and United States for its goal of spreading war and terrorism towards Russia, Iran, and China. Now, they may not have the control of the Hindukush and Panjshir and Andarab, but the Taliban still control the Badakhshan territory, a northeastern mountainous territory, very, very important since it borders both Central Asia, China, and Pakistan. And it is a very essential, it's essential for United States' goal of spreading war and terrorism towards China in Central Asia. Now, despite the lack of control over the heights of Panjshir and Andarab, the Taliban have control over northern Afghanistan, where more than 22 terrorist organizations are currently stationed, as per reports from multiple sources inside and out. So this control in northern Afghanistan allows the Taliban to continue with their plans to spread the war towards Central Asia, but they have not yet created a rearguard for these groups in the heights of Panjshir and Andarab, where it would have been extremely difficult to defeat these terrorist militants have they taken the heights in these territories, because then again, those heights have a history of fierce resistance, and little in history, very, very little in history, they have been conquered by anyone for a long time. Now, this means that in the current situation, the Hindukush Mountains and its surrounding areas are divided between the Taliban and non-Taliban groups, hence none of them have full control. But the problem for the United States and Pakistan is that Iran and Russia have thousands of trained soldiers from the previous Republican Army on their territories, who are mostly native to the Hindukush region. Iran and Russia are capable of forming a group or organization using these assets and other assets and station them in these heights. Of course, we say this because we know these countries are capable of creating such organizations. We have seen examples of such where Russia has different groups operating in different regions of the world, including the separatist movements in Ukraine. And of course, Iran's capability for forming organizations and operating and managing them needs no explanation when you look at the war in Israel right now. Hamas, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and all the other groups in Iraq and Syria operate. These are courtesy of Iranian intelligence group. Anyway, so far, the biggest challenge to United States and Pakistani interests in the region appears to be the rift within the Taliban itself. Now, it seems that due to the extensive infiltration of the intelligence of Iran, Russia, and India inside the Taliban and other militant groups in Pakistan, The war has somehow spread towards Pakistan unexpectedly, by the way, since Pakistan and United States did not intend for this to happen. And if this was a side effect that was sort of predictable, then that means that they may have actually anticipated that something like this would happen and they would control it, or they completely missed it and something like this have happened now, where Pakistan is facing some sort of a civil war. Yet, at the same time, the plan to flare up the war in northern Afghanistan continues. There's a possibility that despite the continuation of war in Pakistan, the war in northern Afghanistan could begin, especially in the Badakhshan region, where the extremist groups have tight grip than the rest of the country. We know that unlike in Panjshir and Andarab regions, the resistance in Badakhshan region did not succeed and ultimately failed. There were several uprisings in the Badakhshan region, but they were quickly suppressed by local extremist groups with the help of Taliban, Pakistan, and the United States. Although the Taliban are officially in control of northern Afghanistan, individuals within this group, such as Qari Fasihudin Fitrat, Salahuddin Ayubi, and Makhdoom Alem, have had direct links with British and US intelligence in the past. Their presence is not only a threat because they are directly connected to these intelligence groups, but also because they belong to the ethnic groups who are the predominant population in the north. Although most of the Taliban are comprised of Pashtuns from Afghanistan and Pakistan, Fasihuddin is an ethnic Tajik from Badakhshan, while Salahuddin Ayubi and Makhdoom Alem are ethnic Uzbeks from the north as well. Another threat that these men pose is the fact that branches of these ethnic groups spread beyond the borders of Afghanistan and into neighboring Central Asian countries such as Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. There are Tajik people in Afghanistan, there are Uzbek people in Afghanistan, and these branches kind of extend beyond the borders of Afghanistan and into these countries, meaning that the people from the same ethnic group are located and populated in two sides of the border, but different nations altogether. The Tajik and ethnic group, well, the Tajik ethnic group even extends into China, by the way, where they populate a region called Tashqorghan, which borders the historically greater Badakhshan region and borders the Afghanistan and Tajikistan regions today. Not only Tajiks, but also Uyghurs who are stationed in northern Afghanistan, probably under the leadership of Fasihuddin, who will be obliged to use them against China if the incursion into Central Asia is successful in the future. Therefore, the anti-American coalition, as I call it, the Iranians, Russia, China, and India, are facing a far bigger threat from these entities than a regular terrorist group. These people are from the same cultures that are related to those of the Central Asian nations, and there are reports that some extremist groups associated with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and East Turkestan are stationed in the north of Afghanistan, which is comprised of soldiers from these nations and cultures. Hence, the deployment of these groups, which have a history of conflict with Central Asian nations and China, means that the threat of spreading war towards Central Asia and China is very real and possibly practical, which would be disastrous for the anti-American alliance in the region. Therefore, again, the effective response to these threats lies in the Hindukush belt in Afghanistan, where the control of the heights serve as a key factor because it has always been and will be the determining factor in the regional and global geopolitical order. The key to challenging and eliminating these threats is to station groups hostile to these terrorist organizations in the Hindukush mountains. Now, talking about history of the Hindukush mountains, well, currently the anti-US coalition aims to prevent the conflict from spreading to northern Afghanistan and beyond. Therefore, the only areas or regions where they can move this conflict as far away as possible from their own borders is towards the southern Afghanistan and eventually towards Pakistan. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a crisis in Afghanistan have always resulted in a geopolitical shift in the surrounding regions of the country because a crisis in Afghanistan has never been subsided on its own soil, but rather exported to another region. Historically, that affected region has always been the Indian subcontinent, But throughout history, there have been occasions where this has affected the power balance in Iran and Central Asian countries as well, and occasionally all of the regions at once. For example, when Ahmad Shah Durrani, the Durrani dynasty, came to power around the Hindukush region, he was able to wage war in every direction, including Central Asia, Iran, and India. But, as has always been the case historically, he continued his raids into the Indian subcontinent and wreaked havoc throughout the Punjab and northern Indian region. Now, those lands are now mostly under Pakistani rule. Punjab and Peshawar and Sindh and Balochistan are parts of Pakistan today, which has been historically under the threat of invasions from groups from Afghanistan. And history have always repeated itself in the same event for at least the last thousands of years, for the last 1,000 years. The area around the Hindu Kush has always been a starting point or a jumping point towards the Indian subcontinent for many groups and dynasties, and everyone around Afghanistan knows this, even Pakistan today. But Pakistan intends to change the course of history with the help of the West, yet, as we see today, Pakistan seems to be in the same crisis before a geopolitical change takes place in that country. The same crisis that I explained with the example of Ahmad Shah Durrani. See, the first phase of this crisis or geopolitical change in the Indian subcontinent have always been with small raids and incursions into Punjab region. It then eventually leads to a massive invasion that changes the geopolitical situation in the Indian subcontinent altogether. But to achieve this similar event today, the Hindu Kush belt or mountains should be secured by the anti-Pakistan alliance or the anti-United States alliance, so that there is no other way for the crisis to head to except for Pakistan. So there is a doorway. Afghanistan is a doorway towards Central Asia, towards Iran, towards China, and towards Pakistan. The anti-American alliance needs to close the doors towards the north, towards China, and towards its west, which is Iran, and to just leave that one door open, which is towards Pakistan, so that they can push this crisis towards Pakistan, which has been the case historically. And this is exactly what Pakistan is attempting to prevent from happening now. Now, this will lead, if the blocking happens in the north, there is no more Hindu Kush region for the Taliban or the forces in the south. This will lead to the southern Afghanistan once again becoming the gathering place of local forces with the support of the Hindu Kush powers and of course the Kandahar region, which has served as the power base for Pashtun power throughout Pashtun history in this region. It will once again become the legacy of Ahmad Shah Durrani, in which it will only look towards one direction, and that is the Indian subcontinent, which is Pakistan today. See, when the backbone of the Taliban is freed from the grip of the ISI due to the escalation of crisis in Pakistan, they will become soldiers of the same purpose as Mahmud Ghaznavi, Babur Timuri, and Ahmad Shah Durrani had. These people have invaded India from the very region which we call Afghanistan today. They've established a power base, a capital in Afghanistan, and they've only and only headed towards the Indian subcontinent for loots or invasion or raids or whatever. With the northern route to the Hindu Kush blocked, the Taliban in the south will no longer be able to establish a government in Afghanistan, and therefore they will try to head towards the only route open and forced to establish their rule there. This again serves the historical reputation of a geopolitical shift in Pakistan through the geography of Afghanistan by local groups known as Pashtuns, who are, by the way, more radical today than they have ever been, thanks to Pakistan and Great Britain. Well, Pakistan will face the Pashtuns of the Taliban, who are thousands of times more extreme than the Pashtuns of Ahmad Shah Durrani. And if anyone has ever read the history of what Ahmad Shah Durrani did in the Punjab and North Indian regions, you'll find out that the Taliban, which we claim to be thousands of times more extreme than those of Ahmad Shah Durrani's soldiers, you can only imagine the devastation they may cause if somehow this war is thrown into Pakistan and Pakistan goes into a crisis and invasions and raids and civil war happens. Now, symbolically, the current goal of Pakistan and United States is, of course, integrating the extremist elements of northern Afghanistan's ethnic groups with their other half across the border in Central Asia, which well failed. But this goal will be successful in the south, and the extreme elements of the Pashtuns will merge with their other half across the Durand line in Pakistan. Pakistan is approaching a historical event that has always been their biggest nightmare, but they will try in vain to prevent it from happening because everyone around Afghanistan wants to crush Pakistan's to end the 40 years of extremist threats from Afghanistan, which Pakistan has been the master of. If Pakistan defeats Russia, India, China, and Iran in the current crisis that's going on, I think it will be nothing short of a miracle, to be honest. And if that happens, then we will have to believe that Pakistan is truly a blessed country. Because if they can overcome the historical events, the course of history, which has always been the same, the crisis always goes towards the Indian subcontinent. And if they manage to somehow throw this against Iran, Russia, or China, while they're united against Pakistan and the United States, then that is a miracle, in my opinion. But nonetheless, if we are going to talk reality, we know that the time of the golden era of the United States is coming to an end. And there seems to be a lot of crisis currently going on in the world for the United States because they are not winning anywhere. But there are more battlegrounds to be opened. There will be more fronts to open, including the Afghanistan front. There's yet the Serbia and Kosovo front to be opened, the Azerbaijani and Iranian front, the Caucasus front. There's the South American front. There will be many fronts to come. There is, of course, the Taiwan crisis, which is still unresolved. And we're just in the beginning of this global power shift where the other superpowers are trying to end the American hegemony and by trying to push it away from their own borders and establish a multipolar world where United States is not the sole decider in every matter in the world and is not allowed to cause any more crisis and war across the globe for their own interests. And Afghanistan, of course, as I said, the Hindukush regions is where it all began. The Hindukush region is where it will all end and a new world order will begin. And for Pakistan's very life existence was because Britain and United States wanted to maintain a presence in South Asia and somehow be close to Russia or the Soviet Union back then, which was located north of Afghanistan and eventually invaded Afghanistan. That was the reason Pakistan was created, so that Britain and United States may have a stronghold in the region, so they may have a presence. And they used the region, the religion factor, to divide or partition British India into multiple countries. So far, as we can see, Pakistan's crisis has just begun, and these crises are nothing new. Everything you see in Pakistan currently with the TTP, the BLA, the crisis, economical crisis, the political crisis, these are just symptoms of the same historical event that's always changed the geopolitical situation in Pakistan, and it's always started in the Hindu Kush region. This was the topic today, ladies and gentlemen. Until we meet again.